Good morning. Welcome to week 2 of professional writing skills. So again, this is just another quick video to sort of walk you through some of the most important and relevant points from the readings for the week. This week we just read one chapter, a very significant and important chapter about planning, composing, and revising your professional writing. So I want to walk you through some of the most necessary and relevant information from that chapter. And again, what I'd recommend you do, if you haven't read it, you could sort of use this presentation to guide you through it. Or if you have already done the reading, you could use this presentation to walk back through the chapter or skim back through it and make sure you've got a clear understanding. Because again, this is going to be simply an overview. And then at the end, we'll go over an example and we'll look at the assignment for the week a little bit more in depth. So to begin, obviously, we've got this chapter on planning, composing, and revising, which is really significant. This chapter really gets you thinking about the process of writing itself and how the process of professional writing differs fairly dramatically from maybe some of the processes for other styles of writing, like academic writing. Typically, one of the most significant things this chapter tells us is that typically you're spending about 1/3 of your time actually writing, just 1/3. The other 1/3 of your time is spent on analyzing your audience and information gathering, and finally revising. So writing is just a part of the process. And depending on, you're going to sort of learn how you work as a writer, hopefully, as we work through this course. But a lot of times people start by information gathering, figuring out who their audience might be, getting some more information on that audience, researching the company's webpage, maybe researching the individual, and obviously getting and gathering information on the the problem that they're trying to address or the issue. So depending, again, we're going to try to produce goal-oriented writing. So is our goal to inform the reader, to persuade the reader, or is it to convince the reader of something? Maybe present them with two sides of a problem and make a recommendation regarding which method the audience should follow. So again, we're going to keep our goal in mind. We're going to keep our audience in mind. So 1/3 of the process is really about information gathering, about how to meet our goal and who our audience might be. And then another third is the writing itself. But then we're spending a whole nother segment of our time on revision and editing, because I think that I would say in this style of writing, grammatical correctness, error-free writing is more significant than maybe in other styles. Because again, you're going to lose your audience, you're going to lose clients, you're going to lose business if you're not producing documentation that's clear and error-free. Okay, so this chapter walks us sort of through some of these things. The planning phase, the writing phase, the revising phase, and the editing phase. So we're going to look at some of that a little bit here, which brings us to the next slide. We want to think a lot about tone and style in our professional writing. A lot of times we're analyzing our audience to try to figure out which tone and which style might be most appropriate for that audience. So if you look at figure 5.1 on page 92 of the course text, I strongly encourage you to revisit that, because this is something you want to think about once you have a clear sense of your audience. So for most of the writing in this course, I will give you a hint. We want to produce documents that fit with the second column, the good business style. So we don't want our writing to be overly conversational necessarily and informal. But again, some of this depends on our audience. If you have a client that you know very well, that you've worked with for years, then your writing might be a bit more informal. But for most of our professional writing, we want writing that's a bit more conversational than maybe you're used to. It's not as formal. Professional writing is not typically as formal as academic writing and some of the writing you're producing for your college courses. So in this style, it's okay to use occasional contractions. It's okay to use first person I and second person you. It's often friendlier. You're trying to create goodwill and develop a relationship with your client or your customer. But again, you don't want to use long, wordy sentences. You don't want to use big words. You want something a layman can understand, because one of the things you're really trying to avoid is making your reader feel like they're not intelligent or that they can't keep up with you. Um, and then the other thing that sets professional writing apart from maybe academic writing and some of these other styles is that it's very much about creating visual appeal. So we want attention to the impact of your document when a reader first glances at it, because that, again, is going to help to get and sustain your reader's attention. Okay, so we're thinking very carefully about tone and style. We're thinking again about our audience and our purpose in writing the document. And we're going through a revising process that's very detailed and meticulous. One of the things this chapter talks about a little bit is the plain language movement. So I wanted to call our attention to that a little bit. Some key things to remember here. Professional writing asks for short sentences, everyday words. So again, words that anybody can understand. Your reader should not have to run to the dictionary to understand your writing. Short sentences, that's sort of a flexible rule, right? We want a variety of sentence structures, like with other styles of writing, to create interest. But at the same time, we want our sentences to be clear and easy to understand. So usually the only time you're creating longer sentences is if you're trying to add to the clarity of your document by linking ideas. We also want to use active voice when possible. Now, there's some scenarios where passive voice is useful, but active voice is the voice that emphasizes the doer. So a sentence like, Colleen watered the flowers. Colleen is the doer, and she's emphasized in that sentence. That sentence is active. But if I said the flowers were watered by Colleen, then we're emphasizing sort of the action, not the subject of the sentence, but what's being accomplished. So typically, active voice is much clearer, it's more forceful, it makes more of an impression. So usually that's what you're going to want to default to in any professional writing. You also, again, you're thinking about grabbing your reader's attention constantly, and you want to make sure one of the ways you can keep their attention is by sort of assuring them that you're not wasting their time in the way that you present your document. So these include tricks like using bullet lists and descriptive headings to announce your ideas and sort of allow the reader to get the gist of what you're discussing by glancing at the document. If your reader has to pause to decipher what you're saying, you're going to lose them. So you're always keeping clarity at the forefront of your mind in professional writing. Okay, so the other really significant aspect of this chapter, the chapter walks you through some half-truths about professional writing that begin on page 95. So I'd recommend you go through back through that section of the text if you didn't review it fairly in detail already. But the other thing that we get to in this chapter that I thought was really worth noting here begins on page 96, 10 ways to make your writing easier to read, because that's one of our primary objectives in professional writing. Anybody should be able to read your document, understand it, and get meaning from it. So the first thing we're shooting for in making our writing easier to read is that our writing is accurate, appropriate, and familiar. So what does this mean? Accurate means that the words you're choosing mean exactly what you want them to say. And appropriate means that the words convey the attitude you want. So this gets into the denotation and connotation things that you read about on page 98. So denotation is basically the literal meaning of the word. Does the word in fact mean what you think it means? And is it getting, is it the best word to get across what the point you want to make? So you're really thinking, because you have fewer words to work with typically, you have less time to get your message across, you want to think about this accuracy and the denotation aspect of your word choice a little bit more carefully. And then connotation is sort of the implied meaning of the word, or the tone set. So connotation, we're thinking again about appropriateness and the emotional associations or colorings of the words you choose. So often this again, tone is going to have a big impact on whether your reader sort of sticks with you throughout the document and how confident they feel in working with you. So when we get to the example at the end of this presentation in just a few minutes, we'll talk a little bit about tone and what an impact it can have as far as the emotional associations created by the words you choose. And then familiarity. Again, you want to make sure your writing is as easy to read and as understandable as possible. So one of the things this chapter tells us that I thought was sort of surprising, you may have been surprised by this, is that big words are often taken as a sign of lower intelligence. So if you're writing a professional document and it's riddled with big words, it almost seems like you're trying to hide something from your reader. That's how it can be construed. So you want to make sure that you're using, again, layman's terms and not relying on big vocabulary necessarily to impress your audience. So you want to use specific, concrete words that are easy to understand and remember. Okay, so the rest of our rules here. Our second rule advises us to use technical jargon sparingly. So again, technical jargon is specialized terminology specific to a field. The only exception here is that you may want to use technical jargon, like let's say you're applying for a job in the nursing field, and you might want to use some abbreviations and terminology specific to your field if you're applying for a job that's in that field. So maybe in a job application letter, but typically you want to avoid jargon that's specific to your field unless you're writing very specifically for an audience that's familiar with all of that lingo. And certainly our chapter tells us to avoid business jargon entirely. So business jargon is basically fancy ways to say things that have sort of become part of our culture and part of our vocabulary when we have professional conversations or write professional documents. So things like at your earliest convenience, enclosed please find, please do not hesitate. These are phrases that have sort of become embedded in our professional lingo, but at the same time, they're just wordy and not really useful anymore. So our chapter again tells us to avoid business jargon and try to find shorter, clearer ways to say these things. Again, our third rule applies to active versus passive voice. Typically, you want to use active voice in professional writing. Emphasize the doer. Emphasize the subject, the person doing the action. Again, this makes your writing clearer and more forceful. However, you can see on page 102 of the course text, there are some exceptions to this rule. Sometimes you want to use passive voice to avoid placing blame. So you can sort of talk about some incident that has occurred without blaming someone or really emphasizing who was at fault during the particular issue. A lot of science writing you actually use passive voice more because you want to emphasize what's happening, not who's actually doing the action, but the result of the action itself. So there are some instances when passive voice might be necessary, and I'd recommend you review page 102 of the course text in depth for some clarity on when active versus passive voice, or when passive voice might be preferable to active voice. But as a general rule, you typically want to shoot for active voice because, again, it adds to your clarity and it adds to the forcefulness and the impression made by your document. Pertains to using verbs to carry the weight of your sentence. So this sort of goes along with the active voice. When possible, you want to try to eliminate wordiness and to make your sentences more forceful. So using more direct verbs can really help to increase the usefulness of your sentence, the clarity of your sentence. So rather than saying make a decision, you would say decide. So you just really want to think about, this is particularly significant and important in the revision process. You want to walk back through sentences and try to eliminate words or phrases that aren't necessary to getting your point across. So again, trying to use more direct verbs rather than lengthy phrases to make your point. This brings us to the fifth thing we can do to add to the clarity of our writing. This is something we will continue to work on throughout the course because this is something that students really tend to struggle with. I think some of us think we're sort of programmed through our academic writing experience, through our college's experience to try to say things in maybe more words, where professional writing, this is really a huge aspect of this, is trying to say things in as few words as possible. Because again, part of what we're doing here is trying to assure the reader, create a good faith relationship with them, and one of the best ways to do that is not to waste their time. So wordiness basically means the same idea can be expressed in fewer words. So this, again, is a huge part of the revision process. You're walking back through your document, and I recommend you take one round of rereading that is devoted specifically to eliminating wordiness and cut any words or phrases that are absolutely necessary. to getting your point across. You also want to think about some of the rules that maybe carry over from our academic writing experience. So this brings us to the sixth sort of recommendation here, which is to vary sentence length and structure. In any style of writing, this is going to create sort of texture, create meaning, and add interest to your writing. But with professional writing, the general rule is to use short sentences for complex ideas. So again, part of what we're typically doing in a professional document is trying to inform our reader about an idea or an issue or a problem. And so to get a complex point across, usually it's best to say it in sort of short snippets that are clear. And then you use longer sentences to show how ideas are related, to link ideas. So you can list ideas in a longer sentence. Or in some instances, you may actually want to go to a bulleted list or to headers that help to uh, present the logic and the organization of your document. Which brings us to some of these other guidelines for professional writing. Parallel structure is another huge one that's going to come back throughout the course, particularly when we think about producing a resume in week 4 of the course. So basically, parallel structure is putting words or phrases in the same grammatical and logical form. This is hugely important when you create a list in any type of writing. But basically, if you start a list using ing words, running, swimming, um, jumping, all of those words in your list should be ing words. If you start a list with past tense, ran, jumped, all of those words should be in past tense. So the words should all take the same form in a list. Again, hugely important when we're thinking about resume production, and this will come back um, throughout the course. But when you're creating bulleted lists as you produce these memos and letters for your first major assignments, you want to make sure you've got the items in that list appearing in the same form. And again, you can see page 106 of the course text for some examples. Another thing that sets professional writing apart from other styles is number 8. So often in any type of writing, you're told to think about perspective or point of view. But usually you're told to avoid second person you. At least you likely were told this in your first year writing courses. In professional writing, you actually want to try to use you. Put the reader in the sentence. Emphasize how the action benefits the reader. So when possible, you want to use you rather than third person, he, she, one, because you in professional documents often creates more impact. Like with academic writing, you want to try to use topic sentences and transitions. So those are the 9th and 10th rules for professional writing that carry over and should be familiar to you. Basically, topic sentences and transitions help to guide your reader through your document, announce your ideas, and create a clear logic for your reader to follow. So one thing to keep in mind when we're thinking about topic sentences is that each paragraph you produce in a professional document should typically discuss only one idea or topic. So basically, your topic sentence should announce that main idea up front, so that if your reader's skimming through your document, they may only look at those topic sentences. They should be able to glimpse and see relatively quickly what each paragraph is about. And then transitions create logical relationships between ideas on a sentence level and sometimes on a paragraph level. They make your organization obvious. Hopefully transitions are familiar to you, but if not, see page 109. There's a list of transition words or phrases. I'm also going to be providing you with an extensive list of transition words via PDF in Module 3. Okay, so this brings us to our last slide, where I just want to take a quick look and compare a first draft and a revision of a professional document. So there are a couple of things that are really dramatically going wrong in this first draft, so it might help if we read over it. This is obviously a memo, and your major assignment too for the second week of our summer is to create a letter. But the rules are going to be sort of universal. The rules we're discussing throughout the course about, excluding extra words, about parallel format, about second person you, about creating goodwill. These things are sort of cumulative. So I want you to keep all of these sort of guidelines for professional writing in mind as you work on any of the assignments during our course. So let's take a look at this first draft here and read it aloud. Dear Miss Squarepants, I know you're new to the company, but I wish to inform you of a serious incident that occurred yesterday. Tim Smith in administration was supposed to schedule a camera crew to film the promo piece in engineering. We were there, but they weren't, and at a considerable waste of our time. Work literally ground to a halt while we prepared, then waited for Tim's people to show up. I tried calling Tim's assistant, who didn't have a clue about the shoot. The truth is, I wasn't particularly eager to arrange this thing to begin with. It was corporate's idea, but I realize the benefit of promoting the important work we do here, especially with the launch of our Covert 2 joint venture with the Army. That said, should I try to reschedule? If I should, rest assured I'll have my assistant call to confirm the camera crew is actually coming so we don't go to all the trouble we did yesterday. Incidentally, I'm interested in publicizing projects some of our managers have just completed. I assume your office would be responsible for that. Who do I need to talk to in order to get something in the company newsletter? Warm regards, Patrick Squidward. So you can see here, there's a lot of issues, specifically with tone and style, and the emotions coming across in this letter. So let's start, I guess, at the beginning with the subject line. Right now, the subject line just says yesterday's incident. There's no specific information. So there's nothing to compel our reader to keep reading or understand why this is important. Then we get to the first line. I know you're new to the company, and it sounds sort of condescending and accusatory right off the bat. And as the reader keeps reading, it's very clear that this writer is angry. We get a clear sense of the emotion coming across in this memo. And as one of the things we read during our first week, it's very important to leave emotions out of professional correspondence. That's one of the quickest ways to sort of kill the idea that you are an objective, professional, sort of distanced person, that you're a credible source. Because if emotions are involved, that's going to automatically diminish your credibility in some pretty dramatic ways. So it's pretty clear that this person is angry, and they're also very clearly placing blame on this specific person they named, Tim Smith, in administration. The first line is really sort of a throwaway line that we wouldn't probably need in revision. I wish to inform you of a serious incident that occurred yesterday, but we still haven't told our reader anything. We haven't told them what the incident is. And then we get to the second line, which we sort of start to get to the heart of the incident, but it's very much about placing blame. We were there, but they weren't, and at a considerable waste of our time. So let's look at the revision. We get a much clearer subject line here, rescheduling the promo piece. So right off the bat, our reader's going to be drawn in. They're going to know what sort of they need to do, the task being laid out for the reader themselves. So then the revision reads, I write to inform you about a miscommunication that occurred yesterday with the engineering promo piece. A camera crew should have been scheduled to film the piece, however, the crew did not arrive. I realize the benefit of promoting the important work we do here, especially with the launch of our Covert 2 joint venture with the Army, and would like to direction regarding rescheduling. Since this oversight originated in the administrative office, I would be happy to have my assistant schedule the camera crew and will ensure that he calls to confirm. I am also interested in publicizing projects some of our managers have just completed, and I understand that your office has publicity. Please contact me by Thursday, July 16th to discuss follow-up action on the promo piece and provide contact information for the individual in charge of the company newsletter. Thank you for your time and help. So you can see here the tone is much more distant. There's no sort of accusatory language. We're not pointing the finger at Tim Smith. We're not pointing the finger at the reader by suggesting they're new to the company and may not know what's going on. So we get a much more distant, professional, so here's the incident that happened and we need some follow-up action. So, and then the author sort of takes responsibility. I would be happy to have my assistant schedule the camera crew and will ensure that he calls to confirm. So there's one of the most valuable things you can learn, I think, about professional writing is that you typically want to avoid assigning blame either to yourself or to someone else. So you want to avoid the blame game in general, and then you want to avoid making excuses and sort of dwelling on the problem. Instead, again, you're dwelling on how you can rectify the problem, the benefit you can create. So in the revision, we see that this author is much more focused on not outlining what happened and what was so problematic, but how we can, in fact, fix the problem we know already exists. Then you can see in the first draft here, embedded at the bottom is this sort of almost like a side note. Incidentally, I'm interested in publicizing projects This is a really significant, important question. So this merits its own paragraph in the revision, and we get much more specific information here. I am also interested, so you can see how even the organization and the topic sentences we've created here. So right away the reader can glance at this and know this is about a miscommunication regarding the promo piece. We get this from the subject line, and then we get a second topic sentence about publicizing projects. We also give our reader a specific deadline. So keep in mind when you're writing your memos and your letters, typically you want to conclude by reiterating the action you want your reader to take, and you want to give them a specific deadline for that action. Please contact me by Thursday, July 6th to discuss follow-up action. And then, of course, you generate goodwill always by thanking your reader for their time, even if it's a situation where something sort of disconcerting has happened. And you can see here, we've got the tone is totally off in this first draft. We've got this sort of angry letter, and then the reader says the writer says warm regards, which is completely contradicts what's happening in the memo itself. And here we have a much more professional sign off. And always, again, in professional writing, you want to provide your contact information, your specific business contact information in your sign off. You never want to say, hi, this is Patrick G. Squidward. They're going to know that because of your email address, because of your address at the top of the letter, and because of your formal sign off. So these are things to keep in mind. Okay, so real quickly, I just want to look at your assignment for this week. For this week, you're asked to write, I'm going to try to get this a bit bigger for us here, a letter. So you've got very specific directions. I want you to write a letter with a nicely designed letterhead to the registrar of IUSB requesting 2 official transcripts be transferred to a university of your choice. 1 to the registrar and 1 to the chairperson of your major. So you've got specific directions. You're likely going to need bulleted lists or headings that direct your audience as to follow-up action. Keep in mind that you're writing this to the registrar's office, who receives hundreds of these requests every semester. So they're going to want to be able to glance at your letter and figure out what they need to do almost immediately. So you're keeping these 4 points in mind. You've got to tell the registrar the transcripts must be at the university. You're providing them with a deadline. Again, you likely want to provide this towards the end of the letter as you sign off. You're going to thank them for their time and generate goodwill. You want to make sure the registrar has all the necessary information and that it's really easy for them to glance at the letter and find the necessary information. You want to make sure you're polite and, again, generating goodwill, using you language, positive emphasis, that you're attentive to tone and professionalism. Do not offer information that is not necessary to the transfer of the document. So the registrar is not going to care about the personal situation going on behind why you're transferring or that type of thing. So making sure you're only including relevant information. So what I'd recommend is you try to write the letter and then go back and do several rounds of revision, being very attentive to the 10 items that promote clarity in professional writing that we read about in this chapter. Then the next step in the directions, you're going to write the same letter with the same letterhead in 3 different formats. So these are letter formats that are typically used in professional writing, known as block, semi-block, and AMS simplified. You can find examples of each format on our Canvas page. Under Module 2, you can simply click on block format and pull up a Word document with an example of what this format looks like. So again, the content of your letter is not going to change. You're just going to produce 3 versions of the same letter, and what you're going to be attentive to is the formatting, the details. This is particularly important in almost all styles of professional writing, detail orientation and going back and double checking. So in this format, the block format, the letter is aligned to the left, it's neat, and it has a very formal appearance, and this is usually, it's one of the most popular formats for business letters. Semi-block has a few different details, and it's not quite as formal appearing. And then AMS Simplified prioritizes sort of different things. In this format, you don't have a salutation, dear so-and-so, or to whom it may concern. And you don't have a closing. Those things are eliminated. Often we might use this AMS simplified style when we create job application letters. If you don't have a person's name that you know you're directing your letter to, typically you want to avoid saying something like Dear Human Resources Manager. And so this AMS simplified style might be something we'll consider using at that stage. But I want you to produce the letter in all three formats, being very attentive to the details. And then, again, I'm going to grade your letters using this rubric. So you'll know exactly what you're shooting for as you review the assignment. So that's it for this week. If you have any questions or concerns, again, you can always email me using kellye@iusb.edu, or you can contact me using the Canvas messenger system. So